So, A House of Dynamite is the latest film from Catherine Bigelow, who's worked on stuff like The Hurt Locker, Detroit, and Zero Dark 30. And I think Bigelow's direction is really good about, ingraining you in the moment of intensity and kind of like dare, almost like taking on like a dare of trying to find like the humanity in that type of like a grounded scenario. And I think for A House of Dynamite, it mostly works. So the whole idea behind the film is that it's a little bit like a kind of like a Rashomon type deal where you watch the same story play out three times, but from three different perspectives. And the whole story centers around a warhead that is launched towards America, and it's going to strike down in Chicago. And measures are in place to kind of intercept it and make sure that the warhead does not touch down in Chicago. And when those measures fail, everyone basically scrambles trying to figure out what to do next and, where do we go from here. And I like how like the film plays out because we see like all the same events happen three different times from not just from like three different people, but three like collectives of different people in this very big ensemble piece here. And I think it's very much a fascinating angle. I don't think it works as well as it could have, but I do think it has that benefit of when you're watching the film, you sort of have like an idea, because when you watch that first segment, like the first third of the film, you see like a complete story play out about how people address like a nuke that's heading straight over into America. And you kind of have like the idea of like, watching this little film play out, and you're kind of wondering, well, where can it go from here? And then you see like an entirely different group of people and how they handle it. And you kind of know where the story is going from that point, but you also kind of don't as well. So I think that's what is most fascinating about House of Dynamite, is that there's always this uncertainty that you're dealing with here, which the characters feel as well. So you feel like you're ingrained in that moment where even where certain events are going to happen and how they play out, you still don't know everything. And I think that's what makes the film so scary. But like I said, this is a film that dares you to find the humanity, and it kind of does. You have Rebecca Ferguson playing Captain Olivia Walker, who's a senior officer in the White House Situation Room. You watch her interact with her child and her husband right before she goes off to work, and there are little moments in between there where she's fearing for her son and her husband, that she tries to get in contact with them in between everything that she's doing. Like there's always this level of, and I think this goes for like all the characters in general, there's always this emotion of desperation that's coating everything, while everybody's still trying to remain collective and trying to figure out what to do next and how to save the day. And if they can't save the day, what are they going to do when everything falls apart? And I think that existential dread is what makes the film so intense, but also fascinating to see what would happen when these people that are in power just kind of find themselves like reduced. When like, they because like I love like Rebecca Ferguson's performance here as Walker, where she's kind of trying to convince herself like, don't panic, there's a warhead, it's looming towards America. Don't worry, we have procedures in place. We're going to handle this. We're going to get it out of the sky. Everything is going to go back to normal. And then it doesn't. And then it's like, where do you go from there? It's like, okay, well, we got to move on to the next countermeasure. But, it's like, don't you still feel something? Aren't you panicked? Aren't you fearful? And it's kind of like one of those things where like some of these characters will hide that aspect and some of them won't. A good example of this is Jared Harris's character, the Secretary of Defense Reed Baker. You watch this guy who's trying to like reconnect with his estranged daughter, just kind of crumble. Like he's very much angry. He wants to find a resolution to this and wants to fight for it. But there comes this moment of just like very grim hopelessness that just overcomes him immediately. Some are a little bit more cantankerous. Like there's Tracy Letts' character, General Anthony Brady, who feels like he's trying to maintain some order while he's working at the United States Strategic Command. And even with like his mouth and his kind of like, trying to relate to other people working around him with baseball, there's still this kind of like dread in there where he's kind of like, look, we've got to face this head on and it's going to be dark. But we don't have any choice. We got to go with it. One of the more interesting characters who I think is kind of very vulnerable in this more than anybody else is Anthony Ramos's character of Major Daniel Gonzalez, who, he starts the film like very, realizing his life is coming apart. And then once, because he's working as a commander at Fort Greely, a military base, which is, detecting incoming threats and trying to destroy them. And, he's like right at the forefront where it feels like, his base should be doing something. And that if he fails, like feels like he's failed the entire world. And there's this very sobering moment where he tries to like comes to terms with his own humanity, which it was very sad, but I really liked how subtle Ramos's performance was. As a little bit more of like an on the ground type of character, you have Moses Ingram as a FEMA official of Kathy Rogers, and you basically get to watch her reaction to feeling like, she's a little bit more important than some of the other people within FEMA, that she feels a little bit. She feels like this distance between like a lot of people when, basically the shit hits the fan, and you kind of feel for her about recognizing, the desperation from other people on the ground. And I think with the House of Dynamite, the thing is like it focuses mostly on the people who are in power or who are working within the government. And that's like the most like chilling aspect of the film is like, these are all people who are really, they establish them as being really good at their jobs and that they have an outside life from their work. Like they feel like real people instead of just like, like key figures in a standard like military procedural or something like that. Where they do have humanity. So to watch them be in this level of authority and watch them go through the motions where they do everything they can, they do everything right, and still nuclear annihilation is going to happen. It's just like, it's so terrifying because like, especially because, like this is assuming that an administration, everybody would be working at the top of their game here, which, you look at the current administration, you're like, no way that they're operating efficiently here. So I think that's like the scariest existential dread of this film is that if everybody was doing all their jobs right, that there would still be that threat of nukes just, throwing us into a different war where so many people would lose their lives and like the planet would be unlivable. But because I feel like a lot of people might dismiss the film on that level alone, or just, threatening with like a nuke war. It's like, okay, well, I've seen Failsafe, I've seen Doctor Strangelove, I've seen what was the stuff like Reds or something. I've seen all these other films where like nukes hit and everyone is scrambling to try to figure out what to do. But I think, and this might be a little bit of a spoiler, but in A House of Dynamite, they do not show what happens when the nuke hits. So, like I said, you get to see all the different stories, but you never get to see what happens after. You don't see the mushroom cloud, you don't see it hit down in Chicago, and you don't get to see what happens after that moment. And I think that's the scariest thing about the film, is that it ingrains you right in the moment and doesn't take you into the next day or what happens after the nuke happens, because it feels, and I think that helps to stress the idea of to stress the fact that this could happen tomorrow, and you don't know what's going to happen the day after that. So what happens when a nuke hits? And I think that's going to be a little bit of the question that everybody's going to be asking themselves after that very ambiguous ending about, what happens next? Are we going to be in a war? Are we going to surrender? How many people are going to lose their lives? Did the nuke even touch down? And did it obliterate as much as it was speculated to? And Bigelow's direction is really good. I mean, no surprise, from her work on like The Hurt Locker in Detroit, where she ingrains you in every single one of these characters and taking you through the process of how they try to address this threat. I also appreciate how Bigelow also, kind of informs the audience very quickly. Like at several points in the film, they'll show different rooms and different organizations, and there'll be very quick typography as the characters are talking to let you know where they are. So like if you're worried what Stratcom stands for, you're not gonna have to like scramble the Wikipedia. They'll tell you immediately when Stratcom is mentioned in the film. Like, oh, it stands for United States Strategic Command. There you go. And there are several moments like that where you know you won't have to like. You won't be lost. You won't feel like you have to look something up, you know, while you're watching this film on Netflix. So, I do appreciate that with Bigelow's direction because then it keeps you in the moment. It doesn't make you like divert or think about stuff about anything else. You're always thinking about how do they handle this threat and what's going to happen when the nuke hits, if it hits. Another great performance worth mentioning is Idris Elba as the President of the United States. Even though he doesn't show up for like maybe an hour into the film, he does show up over conference calls, but not in but only with audio. So you, like I said, like different perspectives here, so you don't get much of Elba's character until much later in the film. And I really appreciated how they establish him as kind of as a president who's trying to connect with other people, but also has very much this uncertainty to him. Kind of feels like he's out of his element a little bit, but once you get to see him more in the third act, you realize that, you know, he just has like a very human reaction and is just trying to find anything to latch onto, and like those very desperate moments where he's got to make these very crucial decisions that are going to change the entire globe for, you know, after like this nuke touches down. And Elba's performance is actually really good in those moments, especially for like the build up to them, because you assume like, you know, when you hear him like, you know, pull out his little card to like, you know, address the codes. He mentioned something about being back in college, and you kind of feel like it's just like a joke or he's stalling for time. But then you realize, no, this guy is actually still uncertain. He's just kind of like fumbling and just trying to find something to latch onto. Like these are terrifying decisions. You know, watching him have that kind of like that desperation. Like at one point, he calls his wife, basically try to find an idea of what he should do going forward, and there's no clear answer. There's this aspect of like trying to grasp on, you know, any sense of yourself that's human that could make you steer towards what is the right path and what is the right option to choose in delegating orders for what happens after a nuke hits. And the film never gives you an easy answer, and in many cases it gives you no answers about where to go forward. So it's very much a scrutinizing and damning type of film, seen from many different angles, and it's deeply frightening when addressing the idea that if everybody was operating at the top of their game, they still might not be able to stop a nuke. Like it was easy to watch that with stuff like with like Failsafe and Doctor Strange, especially with Doctor Strangelove, because there was always that satire that a lot of these people did not know what they were doing. But here, people do know what they're doing, and it's believable enough with like their acting in the direction here that it's frankly scary. I don't think it works out as much here and there. I don't think all the performances are that great for how many characters they throw in here. But the direction is tight. It's tense. It's focusing just right on the moments of right before like the nuke hit. So it's very much a film about asking the question, where were you when the world ended? And this is basically telling the story of everybody who was in power, who had the ability to do something about it, and they did everything they could, and it still wasn't enough. So if you like that kind of like tense, grim type of story, yeah, House of Dynamite, it mostly gets the job done. It's another tense and gripping thriller from Catherine Bigelow.